staff to President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Karl, good evening to you. You think back to that moment where people who voted for President Trump and for Republicans in the election were told, look, we finally had the opportunity that we have been asking for years and promising that if you give us the House, the Senate, the White House, we are going to get so much reform done. And now it kind of looks like they're just kind of leaning back on tax reform and saying that's the big achievement that's going to get us through the midterms.
Well, it is a big achievement.
Absolutely.
It took 30 years to get it done. Now, I have a slightly different view. Talking to leadership and talking to members, I think we're going to have a very active time in both the House and the Senate. The question is, when are they going to be talking about the same thing? For example, in the House, there's probably going to be a vote on a balanced budget amendment. There's going to be a vote on making the individual tax cuts permanent. They've got some infrastructure reforms that they're going to move forward on with the FAA and reforming how we do water resources. That's dams and reclamation projects. There's a whole bunch of stuff they're doing on Dodd-Frank. House and Senate have both got different bills. The House has a more robust bill that they're going to try and push through. They're going to likely move on a bunch of workforce training things. How do you get people out of poverty? How do you give people skills to get the jobs that exist today when they had skills for jobs that have gone away? A farm bill itself, and then the right to try. In fact, if you take a look at it, the House has been really active. They passed 451 pieces of legislation that are stuck over in the Senate. Now, the Senate's got a bigger problem.
I hear what you're saying, and I think some of those would fall under the categories that I'm going to mention. But when you think about draining the swamp, and you look at that omnibus bill, and you hear that what's likely to happen, as Ed just laid out, we may get another CR in October, and then probably an omnibus in December. The president says that will never happen again. But we've seen this movie before, and it happens over and over. There's nothing but increases in spending, and this president promised that we were going to see something different. I think some voters come midterms are going to look for those results.
Oh, I agree with you. In fact, but here's the weird thing that goes on. The Axios study that Ed Henry mentioned refers to what the president's budget laid down and then what was done in the omnibus bill. There's roughly 70, call it nearly $80 billion in additional defense spending, offset with 50 some odd, low 50s, $52 billion in non-defense spending. You know what the biggest chunk of that was, Martha? $21 billion of additional infrastructure spending. Now, here's the president talking about wanting to spend $200 billion on infrastructure in his own proposal. And the biggest chunk of that $52 billion was to be found of domestic spending in the omnibus bill. The additional spending on the domestic side was to be found in infrastructure. Another big increase, I think it's like the third increase, largest increase, was on Homeland Security. Now, it only included $1.6 billion for the wall, but the rest of it gave him some of the things that he'd been talking about in terms of personnel and technology and infrastructure. So it's not as always clear when these things get battled around, because I think the president probably won a little bit more than he might have left the impression on the domestic side.
Yeah, it's just a question of whether or not those opportunities, whether or not that door is going to shut rapidly come during the midterms, and those opportunities might be closed down for another 4 years, potentially, maybe even longer.
And particularly because, look, really quickly, the Senate is going to be taken up with 3 nominations. You think that they're going to be able to approve a Secretary of State, a CIA director, and a Veterans Administration secretary quickly? No, Democrats are going to use that to make the administration bleed.
Thank you, Karl. Great to see you tonight.
You bet.
Let's bring in Tammy Bruce.